Hi everyone. Thanks for coming to my passage presentation. I've been dreading this. Alright, well that sounds bad. I guess saying I've been terrified of this is probably more accurate, but here we are. Way back in 3rd grade, the moment I set foot on RVCS property, I knew this was the school for me. At my previous school, we were restricted from doing things other than the exact way the curriculum wanted. You could color inside the lines, you could go to the principal's office. However, at this new school, it seemed students could do whatever they wanted. Granted, I was somewhat mistaken. However, there was still an undeniable feeling of choice with every project I would go on to complete, and even just the small, mundane things could be made entertaining with enough effort and creativity. Now, here's where I get the sorting to work. It should be here. Perfect. All right, so this first piece, which I will turn to face the audience, is a work of art of mine from 4th grade. It shows off my artistic abilities. And yeah, I drew this for a project where we were drawing a taxidermied bobcat. I just want to have this as a reference point, because if you just see my art now, you'll think, all right, it's changed a little bit. Onto this. This was a music video I worked on with a couple friends back in, I believe, 6th grade? Yep, 6th grade. And yeah, this one was a bit of it came out well in the end, but there were some time management issues. But still, pretty good. And yeah, the time management will become a theme. And this, which is my mobile metaphor up here, shows how I've grown as an artist, kinda. And it shows how I've, definitely gotten better at abstract art at least, and how I have, I guess, grown again, because that's a good word to say in these things. Alright, in my earlier years, I was pretty good about working as an individual. Unfortunately for my poor guides, I tended to gravitate towards large groups anyways, and spent many a work session talking more than working. It was really bad for a while, but eventually I realized that I worked worse in a group of friends. Did this stop young Andrew? Of course not. I simply improved my ability to get work done while talking, which was also not the best solution. What can I say? I was a stubborn kid. So this is pretty evident in writing, which is right here for convenience sake. Back in 3rd grade even, this was one of my earliest artifacts, or 4th grade, sorry, still one of my earliest artifacts. This was on a piece that was named High Anxiety on High Anxiety. Some of you may remember it quite fondly. It was me sort of stepping into the realm of writing more realistic stories rather than fantasy things. And although it was not terrible, it was a bit some of it was a bit more instead of following the rubric, it was more to make my friends laugh, which sometimes works. In this case, it surprisingly did. But in my, oh no, this is out of order. All right, so, yeah, sorry, technical difficulties. Oh, come on, man. All right.
That's probably in order.
Hopefully. Alright, so with that out of the way, I'm glad that'll be recorded and around forever. So in my piece that I did in 5th grade for writing, the artifact I selected was an argumentative essay on Christopher Columbus and Columbus Day. Which I'm going to. Perfect. So it was a bit lacking, honestly. It's definitely shows a bit of improvement, and I think that it was actually pretty good for my age. But all right. Yeah. So it kind of was still a bit of writing it to make my friends laugh. But at this point, I had sort of started to introduce concepts like, actually having arguments in an argumentative essay, which I think did improve it. Fast forward to 7th grade in I Am Poetry. This was meant to be comedic, but I actually think I did a pretty good job about somewhat staying serious on it. There was still a bit of room for improvement. I would recite it, but I don't want to. And yeah, it's, it was, still room for improvement, basically, is what I'm saying. And then moving on to 8th grade now, I wrote this piece as an article of the week, which was bi-weekly. We would write an article, or actually respond to an article. We'd write an article on an article. To sort of either agree or disagree or sort of respond to the information we were given. And this one came out actually pretty well. I think this is one of my best works, I guess, I've ever done at Ridge and Valley, because I had sort of practiced this argument before. The the article was called "Let Children Get Bored Again." So, although I had not written it, I'd basically been drafting it in my head for a couple years. But I was able to stay serious without, while keeping in a comedic element. I think I found a good balance here, and I'm pretty proud of that. All right, now to relating, which is not my own. Boom. All right. So, back in 3rd grade, when I first had joined the school, I was, a bit new to the concept of having games instead of strictly inside the classroom schoolwork. But this was a, reflection I wrote at the end of 3rd grade, which was my first year here, and it kind of shows how even from the beginning I really just enjoyed strategy a bit, but also the whole area of relating, I guess. And yeah, even in my first year, I just enjoyed the social games basically. And then here, here is something I hold very near and dear to my heart. It is I don't actually know the word for it. The paper that shows off the play Geology Rocks, which was a play I did in 4th grade. For those of you that missed it, you guys missed a lot. It was amazing. I still remember all the words to that song. Moving on. It was sort of one of the first big experiences and artifacts I had gotten at the school. It was my first full year, and it was definitely one of the highlights. It was just great. Friend Plan is the best plan. Here, in 7th grade, we worked on a project called Ancient Civilizations, where we were assigned an area of land on a map, and we built a civilization off of it using older technologies and researching stuff, and it all culminated in this event called Agora Day, which was a worldwide market sort of, and it was where all these civilizations that had been somewhat separated got to go together and buy stuff from each other and sell stuff. at their stands. So this shows, well, first of all, my crippling addiction to beef jerky, which isn't even all on there. I bought so much beef jerky. But also, it showed my ability to, I guess, be social. I did not think that through. So in 8th grade, we were assigned kindergarten partners. My two partners are Hank and Patricia, up there. I think it's, we started off the year a bit awkward, because it was kind of, I had to regulate myself a bit to make sure that I was, talking appropriately, which I think I did a good job with. I just got in my own head a lot. So, but I think it does show a lot of growth. Sometimes it's harder to see exactly from year to year how you have, changed. But this experience, mentoring Patricia and Hank was, it helped to show just how I've grown as a person since I came to the school. I'm not sure I could have done that a few years ago. Alright, so, given enough time, I eventually had the revelation that talking to friends slowed down the group, even had stopped affecting me. So after a long time resisting, I went back to typically working on my own projects rather than being in a large group. Though there were always outliers. Now I can safely say that the message my guides were telling me for years has finally hit home, and I am able to work in groups as well as an individual with pretty good results. Alright, while I'm on the subject of the problem child I was, it would hardly be fair not to mention my very extremely teeny tiny, slight argumentative streak. So as much as bouncing off the walls got me in trouble at my old school, my tendency to talk back didn't do me too many favors here at RBCS. It took me many years, but I can safely say now that I'm no longer as argumentative as I once was. If you disagree with that, I'd be glad to argue about it. Speaking of argumentative, here is something that I am usually not the biggest fan of, but... Oh, missed it. Where are you? There we are, cooking. So, this is young Andrew, from 5th grade actually. And so, to give a bit of backstory to what I said about not exactly enjoying cooking, it's not one of my strong suits, to say the least. And when I don't like things and I'm not good at things, typically I avoid them. Coming into RBCS, however, it was part of the things that we were doing, and even if there were some difficulties at first, I moved past it, and I think this was one of the turning points in the year where I got to carve a spoon, which relates to cooking because it's sort of like the stuff that maybe not everyone thinks about when they're cooking. It's like the stuff that goes into it, the preparation. And I actually really enjoyed it, and it felt a bit more natural to be making recipes and stuff after that point in the year. So I sort of went through with it. And then cut to 8th grade. This is a community snack that Kine and I made. It was pumpkin pancakes. It was right at the beginning of the year. This was the first community snack I made. And I had sort of gone back to that mindset of not particularly enjoying cooking. But with the community snacks, I have grown to accept that I will have to do it occasionally. I don't like cooking, but I am able to do cooking, and without complaining, mostly, which is growth. All right. Not only have I grown academically since I joined RBCS, I've also grown as a person, and even if I had a rough time getting here, I'm forever grateful for my time here. Additionally, I've accomplished many things here I would never have accomplished anywhere else. Though the thing I like to brag about the most is I was working with two peers of mine to redesign the parking lot project. The parking lot as a math project. Boom. Speaking of math, another thing I like to brag about is that I'm 2 years ahead in math, which I'm actually pretty proud of. So, here's my math stuff. Right in the back, best for last. So, this is my, this is a project I worked on when I was in 5th grade for 7th grade math. It's a bit hard to see in this thing actually, so I'm going to hold it up. It is a park I made. It was, using my art skills, which you can see here how that worked out. But I think it was actually still surprisingly creative. This was at a time when I didn't really enjoy art even more than I really don't enjoy art right now. So but I was able to tie in math to art, and I think that helped me, to actually get the project done. And I ended up enjoying the end result, even if the process was painful. Now here is the project I mentioned earlier. This is a packet that we presented to the leadership team and a team of committees. Slipping my mind. This is the packet here. I worked with a couple friends and a new math guide to redesign the parking lot. We sort of did it in exhibits, where each paper was not the standalone project, but we would call to the packet that we handed out in our presentation. And it was a really good experience for me, with an actual formal, submission for a project. And I think that this will definitely help me in future years, even if it was a bit terrifying at the time. Lastly, from 8th grade, this was a capstone essay I wrote for my math course. And this was an endeavor. There was a bit of difficulties with formatting. I had never done any essays in MLA format, which I discovered was not sunshine and roses, but I did get it done eventually. I managed to get 100 on it, and it was a good preparation for later in the year when we would move on to use that format ourselves. So even if it was definitely a struggle at the beginning of the year, it was still really helpful for moving on in the year. Additionally, I've become a pretty advanced reader, and because of this, my vocabulary isn't half bad either. And here is a book chain. Now this, as proud of it as I am, also goes to show how I am, a bit lacking in the department of remembering to do things. Specifically, putting books on my book chain. I had a goal to get this to go across the whole classroom by the end of 8th grade year. Unfortunately, I did not accomplish this. I can maybe stretch it out to reach half the width of the classroom. But it was still a lot of improvement from 6th grade, where I hardly had anything on it. Moving to 7th grade, I was able to remember a lot of my books a lot more often. And in 8th grade, although it's not all my books, it has definitely been a large majority of my books that have gone on the chain. So for that, I am actually kind of proud. And I'm also kind of working on a 40 books thing. It is not done right now, the full list, but basically it's for my mission checklist, which is a whole other thing I'll be covering. But it is where it's a challenge for the year where you read 40 books of different categories and you write reviews on some of them, and they have to be specific categories. So it's going outside of my comfort zone as a reader. Traditionally, I'll just read normally fantasy and just normal fiction, but this actually helped me to kind of realize that there are other genres and they are still enjoyable, even if I wouldn't traditionally read them. All right. Anyways, that's enough about me. Just kidding. You were about to get roughly 15-something more minutes of that. That's right. All right, before I begin, I'd like to say that this is definitely the easiest part to write and probably the hardest part to read. Behold my flaws. To begin with something that really stings, I'm really bad at remembering homework that isn't important. To clarify, of course it's important if it's homework, but I mean typically I forget things if they're not such a large project that forgetting them is impossible because they infiltrate my every waking and sleeping moment. If a passage presentation draft is due, the math Excel sort of slips through the cracks. Not that I'm justifying anything. Speaking of which, another flaw of mine is being very defensive, although honestly, a lot of the time, I'm right. Which leads us perfectly into another flaw of mine. I fluctuate a lot from thinking I'm right about everything to assuming I'm wrong about everything. Oh, and my time management is pretty bad. Alright, so that brings us to independent study. I told you the time management thing would come back into this. So, independent study. This is a game of mine that I made in 4th grade. It was called Flappy Bolt. It sort of became a victim of both poor time management and lack of knowledge in the code. At the end of the year, I had to unfortunately, say goodbye to this project because there was no salvaging what became of it. But the next year, I was back at it again with another project on Scratch that came out a little bit better, called simply just Alien, because I didn't think of a title for the whole year. And it was like you had to dodge, basically, moving aliens that came at you in a spaceship. And the first few levels worked, and I managed to get a pretty good schedule going. And then I sort of hit a wall when I realized I hadn't organized any of my code. And I started basically adding code where it probably shouldn't have been, and the whole thing fell apart. But it does show improvement for my time management. Even if, I also had to ditch this one. Then in 7th grade, as a second music video, because this was the year after my other music video, I worked in KLE this time, but also a bit of independent projects, to make a music video for our class, and I was able to properly, organize the photos to, get them on the disc without losing any of them, which was pretty good compared to the year before. And I was able to manage my time effectively to get it done before the end of the year and before the last week and get it handed out to people. So that worked out. And here is my infamous graduation project fundraiser proposal form, because this one went through many, many drafts. I believe the final count was 5. It ended up getting pushed back a couple of weeks and break, so it unfortunately messed with our schedule a bit, but even still, Alex Kine and I were able to turn around and get our backup goal, and even though we at first thought we weren't going to even be able to manage that, so we were able to sort of adjust from the era of assuming that our fundraiser would just be instantly perfect. And so it's kind of a bit of, a strength and a weakness, time management. But I definitely think that it has gotten better and manageable. It's not all bad. I've taken many steps to work on my flaws, from attempting to keep my ego in check, and actually that's the biggest thing, as well as trying to keep a schedule, which works occasionally. This is fun. To write, it probably is very difficult to deliver. Thank you to past me. That reminds me of one last thing I struggle with: staying serious during important presentations. Alright, so this year I attended my first protest when on March 15th, students around the world in over 100 countries participated in a school strike to protest the political inaction in response to overwhelming evidence man-made climate change is real. And is getting worse. And honestly, I could definitely see myself attending several more in high school, and further on in life. Who knew standing in front of a place could be so effective? Right. And tying into that is service learning, which is somewhat self-explanatory. It's kind of where we go out, or stay in, and learn about the environment in various different ways, most of them hands-on. Let me find it. Come on, man. Excellent. All right, so this is a photo from an overnight that I had in 7th grade. So while it, at face value, may show the dangers of peer pressure, it also shows that I'm committed to getting in there for the environment. This was on an overnight where instead of the typical like hiking or canoeing, we went instead to a beach to help tag horseshoe crabs, to monitor like their numbers and see if help get statistics on whether or not their population was increasing or decreasing or staying the same basically. And this was honestly one of the best overnights I've had. No offense. And yeah, this face hugger is called horseshoe crab. And yeah, this was one of the best overnights, and also the probably my favorite artifact I have for reasons. All right, so this, on a more serious note, is a photo from this year. That in there, perfect. And while I may have chosen it for my friend Steven in the back there, it was also a good experience with working at Genesis Farm in order to help clean up the area around the grandfather tree at the center of their property. It had gotten a bit overgrown for various reasons, but we went in there and we helped to clean it up as sort of thank you for our first overnight being there. Now, here is bioregional studies. My first artifact is from 4th grade, where I did a species on the edge project with this beautiful bog turtle. I got actually surprisingly good marks on it, which is, surprising to Kirby as it was surprising to pass me. But it does show how I've technically grown as an artist since my earlier years, and it also shows, commitment to the project and to the environment, because I was very close to not even bringing that in because I was still pretty embarrassed with it, but I did it and I brought it in and I didn't do completely terrible. And then additionally, for my mission checklist, which is basically a packet where we, as well as other things, identify a lot of different creatures and plants and tracks. And this is a piece I did on the lady fern, because I have an affinity for ferns. And even though it may just be a curved line with a couple triangles on it, and even though it did take me a lot of drafts, I still managed to draw something that I did not think I could draw, which is, it was a bit nice. And it definitely shows growth. I would do it back and forth, but I don't want to look at the other one again. And in gardening, now, I may have mentioned before that I was a slightly argumentative child, and gardening kind of definitely played into that. I wasn't the biggest fan of gardening in the traditional sense. I didn't necessarily protest it, but it was not my favorite activity. And then, here we are. We went on a trip in 7th grade, to plant some trees in near a stream that traditionally didn't have trees of this type. It was kind of getting overrun, as you can see, by that invasive species that is the palish looking grass. And along with our team, we planted something like over 100 trees, I believe. And it was just a bit eye-opening. It was nice to be able to see the results of what I had actually accomplished after, because that was always my main concern with gardening. I would plant a ton of seeds and then have no idea if they actually sprouted for a couple months. It was nice to have something just in front of me, like, you did this. And then in eighth grade, I went to the soup kitchen. I was the person that handed out the soup to those who needed it. And it was the end to a project we had started in 7th grade where we had harvested tomatoes that had been actually planted by the 8th graders and had gone on to make a soup. And the last year's 8th graders had gone on to do what we did this year. So we used the soup from this year's 7th graders, and it was once again nice to actually have the result in front of you and be able to do something with it. And this was sort of the point where I was accepted that me and gardening didn't always get along, but we're kind of at an okay place now. All right. So I fully intend to contribute to my community by caring about its local politics and natural health. As with the model of sustainability and race-varied teachings, I too agree that private land is not a bundle of rights, but instead a bundle of responsibility. This model speaks of the currency of reciprocity and a culture of exchange and relationships rather than a culture of individualism and exclusion. Also, a gift economy would be cool because free stuff. All right. Since I joined the school, I've definitely grown a lot as a person. I know that everyone cringes a little when they look back on memories of the things they did as a little kid, but I swear young me was deliberately being terrible to people to make current me feel awful about it. I used to get really mad about admittedly minor things and would engage in verbal duels with whatever authority figure was currently present, as well as just generally bouncing off the walls, slacking whenever possible, and not really caring about activities, which was weird because I remember actually really enjoying the stuff I worked on. But I also know that I protested most of it and never really admitted I enjoyed it until long after whatever I was doing was over. So, along with that comes expeditions, which is towards the front. In expeditions, it sort of relates to this, because in my earlier years, I had a bit of difficulties with them, involving soap. Which I'm not going to explain, but although this picture does show that I need to work on remembering sunscreen, it also shows how I was, willing to, go through with something, especially since this was, one of the best overnights. And this was on day 2, and it was, we were getting close to wrapping up. This was about to be the last night before we went and just left. This was the last night at tagging horseshoe crabs, and this was just us, getting ready for it basically, a bit early, but still getting ready for it. And it kind of shows how I've grown, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. And this is the route that Stephen and I planned for our 8th grade graduation expedition. And it was, and is, a new record, 21.5 miles, as well as other things I would like to brag about. Cool, and yeah, it shows, so initially, to give a bit of backstory, I actually wanted to go a little bit further, which everyone was not the biggest fan of. So I was able to compromise and adapt to find a route that was just half a mile longer than the previous record, and also was able to get an extended day on the last day to make sure that we could make it. And it ended up working out surprisingly well, and with the exception of a couple ladles, no one really lost their mind. And yeah. Alright, so this basically just shows how I have grown with planning and, I hate to say it, but like leadership a little bit, and for striving for greatness, whereas I used to be, a bit of a slacker. Alright, given time and long continuous talks with various different guides, I became more aware of the things I was doing and how they made me look as a person, as well as how they hurt the people that I honestly didn't want to hurt. So began the long process of channeling and stopping my excessive energy and impulsiveness. It took a long time and a lot of effort, but it's been worth it to get to the point where I am today. Before you all, probably shaking, not from energy bursts, but from intense nervousness. Alright, and that segues nicely onto my next area of growth, presenting. Although I joke that I've somehow gotten worse at presenting as I've gotten older, I feel I have actually improved a significant amount. Which you will see in these artifacts. Alright, so this was actually, I believe, my earliest artifact that I had in my whole portfolio. It's from a project I did in 3rd grade, which was to make an Iroquois lap book, which was, it basically was one of my first experiences with like a real like project, where it was like actually a bit of a, more of a, like a deadline and like an actual like rubric rather than a bit more freeform. I mean, at RBCS anyways. And I think I did pretty well. I was able to get right into it and complete it, even though I sort of joined a bit late to finish the project. And I actually think I did pretty well, if I remember correctly. And it also shows on the back here, that my handwriting is also marginally improved. Alright, now this, moving forward to 6th grade, this is one of my favorite projects I have ever done, and I think it's also probably one of my best presentations. This was Life Invisibilia. It was a bit weird, if you could not tell by the birth announcement, but I managed to make it sort of a personal challenge to find the most like out there formats while still like containing information. Like for instance, at the bottom where it says love from his mothers, it was to subtly convey that tardigrades actually don't have any males in the species. And yeah, there was a couple other things hidden in there for the eagle-eyed people that can actually read this thing on there. It's pretty hard. And then in 7th grade, this was the second to last student-led conference I would ever do at RVCS, with my last being this year. And although the initial ones weren't necessarily bad, this one was definitely a great culminating piece for the year. Even if it was only halfway through, I managed to touch on most of our larger projects, and I was just rated high quality there, which is a quote. I'm high quality, with a signature too, and I'm pretty proud of it. And right here is from 8th grade, and it is my element superhero, which, to give a bit of backstory to why that was a bit of a surprise to me, having a good score in the rubric, I sort of went through and made like an 8-page backstory, which was a bit more than we were asked to do. What can I say? I'm an overachiever. So it took a bit of time to present, and it was not all smooth sailing, but I guess I did good enough. And it also shows how my art has still gotten a little bit better. Because this is, right here, is the character, Midas. I drew tentacles because I actually did not know how to or want to try and draw hands. And I actually built the character around just that because I did not want to have to draw hands. But I think the presentation went pretty well. I certainly enjoyed creating it and presenting it, even if it did take a lot of time. All right. Oh, sorry. Perfect. All right. Although I was certainly less nervous as a child before and during presentations, It was from a standpoint of not really caring too much about how I looked during the presentation. If a joke bombed, if I said something I definitely shouldn't have said, I honestly didn't really notice and just continued as usual. So as much as it's gone on to make certain things harder, I've gained the skills of self-reflection and regulation, whereas those both used to be difficult for me. Alright, it's about to get a little bit heartfelt. I've met some wonderful people in my time here at RVCS, and made some friends that will last for ages, or at least until I can do better than the lads. Nah, I'm kidding. I'm just not going to elaborate, because emotional stuff is awkward for everyone involved. I've been given the gift of the amazing guides that work here at RVCS, and everyone genuinely enjoys teaching and actually cares about the students. Everything that has helped me to grow here emotionally and academically is a direct result of the caring people I've met here. Alright, and here we are. The final piece of this. My metaphor. So, if I had to describe my time here at RVCS, I'd say it's comparable to jumping out of a plane with an umbrella as a parachute. Alright, now that sounds pretty bad at face value, but hear me out. My time here at RVCS is like the umbrella, and high school, on the horizon, is the concept of jumping out of a plane. And honestly, if you were offered the option of an umbrella or nothing, you'd probably choose the umbrella. I selected the umbrella as a metaphor because the trip down will most likely not be smooth sailing. There'll be a lot of panicked screaming and mental breakdowns, not to mention sheer terror. Alright, in the beginning, as you can see on this handy thing over here, my RVCS experience was a lot like attempting to board the plane. I got on much later than I had wanted to, and the waiting was torture. Thanks, airport security. However, after the initial setbacks, the next few years were business class food. Not really comparable to most actual food because I was a small child and this is a school, but it was certainly a whole lot better than the typical airline food that most people get. The next few years were just cruising, with, bits of turbulence here and there. Then, right as I was most relaxed and about to, and almost slipping off to sleep, 8th grade started, and the plane was hijacked and set on fire for good measure. Right off the bat, there was a significant change in the amount of work needed in preparation of the terrifying 4-year plan. I was given lessons that will definitely help soften the fall, however mildly, and maybe think of my various experiences with meetings, mentoring, drafting, and proposals as nice pillows to try and cushion the impact. And as the engine finally fails, and I prepare to jump ship, I'll, fingers crossed, receive an umbrella labeled Ridge and Valley Charter School Diploma, and who knows what comes next. Perhaps I'll float down gracefully, Mary Poppins style. Maybe the plane wasn't as far off the ground as I initially thought. More likely, I'll fall to my death with a cool umbrella. But at least the experience of acquiring the umbrella was exciting and fun. Any questions?
Yes. Very important question.
Sorry, can you leave the microphone on?
Oh, sure.
During YouTube?
Oh yeah, you keep recording this part. Technical difficulties. Here we are.
The gentleman whose face appears during every subject headliner, how important is he in your career?
Very important. Next question. Yes, go Lisa.
So I was thinking about your desire and love for debate, and wondering how you think that will serve you now that you've sort of seen the challenges of constant debate, but the benefits of occasional debate. I'm wondering how you see that helping you moving towards high school and beyond.
Well, I suppose it'll definitely help for if I join a debate team. Easy answer. But it will also, allow me to retain who I am as a person, like without just giving in to what everyone says, while also not arguing with everything and picking and choosing my battles, sort of.
And I just have a question. When you were going through the books, did you see that in Stardust they have a tiny tardigrade book?
They did.
Did you notice? Yes, because I love tardigrades too.
Oh, actually, I did see that one. Now that I think about it, yeah.
Most people don't love tardigrades.
And on the tardigrade point, so is it a boy or no?
Don't think about it.
Can't stop.
Okay, Casey.
as you make it through these next 4 years?
For academics or just as a
In
concept?
general.
Well, I hope I continue to use like math in LA, otherwise that was just a big waste of time. But
Like skills.
yeah, I think the skill of being able to talk to adults without being like really awkward will definitely help me moving forwards, or at least without being more than the usual level of awkward. And also meetings. Standing in on meetings was definitely a helpful experience because I sort of am getting a feel for what it's going to be like when maybe my parents aren't there and I'm more of a one-on-one sort of thing. Which has happened. Will?
Yeah, what are you most excited about going into Lenape, and what are you most afraid of?
All right, so I'm excited for I'm excited for most of the things I'm terrified about. For example, I'm excited to be like moving forwards in math for the next year, but I'm also terrified that grades might start to slip, which I really don't want to happen. And it's the same with like extracurriculars. Like I really want to go on to do soccer, preferably like I hope to make varsity, but I'm also terrified I won't make it. So it's like a double-edged sword.
What are you gonna miss the most about Ridge Valley?
Oh no. I don't know. I'm definitely gonna miss the creativity, which is still gonna be like a feature, obviously, or I hope. But I don't think it'll be to the same extent. We were given a lot of like individual choice here, and I think that in an environment where there's more students, that might not be as possible.
Alright, so a lot of your whole presentation was about how you moved through these awkward or uncomfortable places. Like you referenced that many times with the gardening, with the drawing, with your art park project, cooking, gardening, if I didn't say that already. Hank and Patricia, you used the words that it was awkward or uncomfortable at first. So how are you going to continue thinking about that when you're presented with some things that might not seem like when nobody else is pushing you to do those things? How are you going to push yourself into those uncomfortable places?
Thanks for that hard question. I feel like I'm being lectured. I guess I'm going to have to do that on my own. I think I've gotten better at, sort of doing that for myself now, and it's going to be a test, high school, when there's not necessarily someone that's going to be breathing down, or not breathing down, but that's right there to help me along. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be a change, but I think I can manage. Brody?
Do you plan on making more friends in high school?
Hopefully. We'll see. Yeah, guys.
I'm wondering what thoughts or advice do you have for us if there is another student behind your path here in the Valley someday, somewhere, that has some similar challenges that you had when you were around here? What would you recommend?
I don't actually.
Words of wisdom, I think, for the guys is what I'm asking. What would you want us to think about?
I did like a lot of the individual stuff. I feel like last year especially, when it was more of like a, with math, when it was like sort of a smaller group, it was, it was a couple of us, and it was like, I don't know. It's a tough question. I guess my words of wisdom would be maybe try and keep it in small groups, but make sure that there is room for reaching out to, make social connections.
One thing I caught in your presentation was the growth of your writing, and I liked how you talked about how there's a comedic growth in there too, where some of the writing starts off just trying to make your friends laugh, and we're still trying to make our friends laugh, but then we're also doing the assignment, and then we get to points where we're writing, maybe that cat essay or like one of your best works. How do you see writing being a part of your life moving forward in high school and other endeavors?
In high school, I'm definitely going to have to write a lot of essays, from what I understand, stereotypically. But I think that it'll also just be a good like skill to have, like even just just if you were like to type like a letter to someone, or write a letter to someone, or like just basically. All right, this isn't really answering the question, but just writing in general. It's still good information to have, like knowledge to have to build off of. How to keep it comedic to the point where it has a personality, but also formal enough that it's not going to get me in trouble. Yeah.
Andrew, as someone who came to Ridge and Valley after having been somewhere else, I'm curious, what advice might you be able to give someone else who is coming in new to Ridge and Valley from a different type of experience? What advice might you have?
It's a lot different from public school. Like there isn't as much, I guess, age segregation. That was like the weirdest thing for me coming in. When it was like at my old school, it was sort of like every age kind of did their own thing. Even at like recess, where everyone was like there, they weren't really together. And this year, having it be like 4th to 8th is all together and like actually like doing stuff together. It was really just weird and like eye-opening, especially with the classes where, how can I forget, having the 2 years together. Like I didn't have the kindergarten experience at RBCS, so it was kind of just like, it was a bit staggering at first. But I guess my advice would just be, get used to it.
Get used to it.
Yeah. It's a bit harsh, but it's kind of true. But I guess on a more serious note, just maybe trying to get like that sort of mentality of separation out of your head could be definitely helpful.
Andrew, can I get a picture of you holding your book chain?
Awesome, yeah, sure.
Yeah, wrap it around you like a snake.
Wrap around them.
Any way you want, I want it all.
Like a tornado?
I'll wrangle it.
There you go, wrangle it up.
Say that word.
Here's my question.
Hold it like this, whatever you gotta do. Sit, stand, whatever you want.
That's good.
Great.
That's
Thank
good.
you.
I like that one. That's awesome pose.
Where's the umbrella?
Oh, yes.